1 year after the Neo Geo Mini landed with a relative thud, SNK returns with the Arcade Stick Pro. We were sent a sample for review, so let's see if this thing manages to right the wrongs of its predecessor. Hey everybody, welcome back to another mini episode. This time I'm joined by my good friend, John Linneman.
Hey Coury, I'm over here in Germany, ready to talk some SNK. So, what you got for me today? Let's discuss this.
A lot of people are curious whether or not this is going to be better than the Neo Geo Mini, and based on what I've been able to tell, it is certainly an improvement, but it's far from perfect.
I mean, there's kind of two things to discuss when discussing a stick like this. There's obviously the build quality, there's the actual video output, and then there's the game selection. So I guess that's three things there. And I feel like this does actually sort of right some of the wrongs of the Mini, especially when it comes to the actual control stick on the unit itself. It never felt right, it didn't have any micro switches in it, it was very cheap, and the same with the extra controllers. They looked like the Neo Geo CD pad controllers, but again, they lacked micro switches, so they felt mushy. And then if you wanted to play on a television, the HDMI video output was just awful, just a blurry mess.
It's so bad.
It's so bad. This new stick has improved on some of these things, but there's other limitations.
But first we should talk about the stick itself. So this thing is releasing for $129.99 in the US, but it really feels high quality. The buttons are not like Sanwa or Shimizu, but all of the components inside are easily swappable, I guess. The stick itself is a square gate instead of an octagon.
That's not a bad choice. Everything feels good in that sense, and the buttons are nice as well.
You can change out the top of the stick very easily through a little port on the bottom. You can take off the ball head and put a bat top. I mean, I prefer bat top.
Really?
On my arcade joysticks, but I mean, some people, I think especially fighting game fans prefer the ball top.
I'm kind of a fan of the ball top personally. I just kind of came off of looking at that Capcom stick, which is also kind of, I guess you could say, a pseudo competitor to this. That does, I feel, have slightly better components in the buttons and the stick, but the Neo Geo stick also still, it feels, for just being stock generic parts like this, it does actually feel pretty good to use, and it's a huge step up from the Mini. But then there's also things like the actual physical unit design. Like the plastics feel relatively high quality with a nice sort of like texture to it. I like the button placement of things in the sense that like you have all your menu stuff and coin and start buttons and everything on the one side of the unit. And then it kind of all works very well, and it feels like a nice standalone thing that's enjoyable to use physically.
A key thing about it is that it has 8 face buttons, which goes against the typical Neo Geo 4 face buttons, but that's because it has a USB connector that it's pretty cool the way it's hidden inside. You can open this little compartment up and there's a USB cable that comes out and it goes out the side. It has 3 different modes: the Neo Geo mode for this stick and the Mini. 2 modes for PC, so I guess in the future you'll be able to hook it up to emulators on your PC, or hopefully to like other consoles. I did try it with my undammed Neo Geo to USB adapter to see if I could use that with my Neo Geo MVS, and the adapter did see it in the PC2 mode, but the lights on the stick itself just kept on flashing, so nothing happened.
That's actually one of the potential best parts of it, as it becomes both a standalone unit with these games, but also potentially something you can use on other platforms. And if they could really flesh that out, I feel like there's a lot of potential there just to, it's a fun way to get a stick, but also something else for it. I mean, obviously, if you're really into fighting games and you want a proper stick, this isn't really for you, but it is a cool bonus for the people that are shelling out the cash for something like this, in that they can also use it for other things.
So hooking this thing up to a TV, it has USB-C for power, and it has a full-size HDMI out, which does output at the expected 720p. The Mini had a HDMI Mini, and those things, I get so annoyed whenever I have to deal with HDMI Mini. It always feels so fragile.
I hate it. So I'm very happy that they also went with a full HDMI port here. But considering the size of the stick, it kind of makes sense. So good choice though, either way.
But it doesn't come with a power adapter, which I guess is increasingly becoming a normal thing. No HDMI is included. I mean, not that it really matters. I think that most people have plenty of spares laying around these days.
You say that, but I do kind of feel though, for a product that's meant to be plug and play like this, including a video cable is kind of an essential thing. This is a stick you hold in your lap, right? And by not including a video cable, I mean, most people, if they have spare HDMI cables, they're probably not that long, right? And that's kind of an issue. You need a longer cable in a larger, you know, in even a moderate sized room. You're going to be sitting back with this unit. You want to be able to plug that all the way into your AV receiver or directly into your TV, and you're going to need a long HDMI cable to do it. And that's the type of cable that you may not have spares of.
You can hook up the Neo Geo Mini controllers for 2 players. Whoever you decide gets stuck with that controller, I feel sorry for them.
The Neo Geo CD controller, the original controllers, are so good. They're one of my favorite ways to play Neo Geo games. And they got the look down, but it just isn't the same. The stick itself is bad, and the mini versions of those controllers, and that absolutely destroys it. Like, if they had shipped those properly and really done an exact replica of those original CD pads, man, that would be awesome to have, because they are great.
So when you boot up the system, you get a pretty bare bones interface. It looks very much like the Switch, which is kind of funny, with a yellow overall scheme to it.
I actually kind of thought that was borderline too much like the Switch in a way, where it really feels like they're just flat out copying the look of the Switch menu design. And I like it. It does have a slightly different aesthetic, but it's so similar really when you look at the way everything's laid out and the icons of things.
But it's completely silent. You get sound effects when you select something, but at first I wasn't sure if it was working right.
You know, not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but it does make the menu system feel very bare bones and sort of empty in a way.
And I mean, that's part of the whole thing with these, is that they are kind of selling this entire experience in one package, and having things missing like that, I think, takes away from it.
But obviously, you know, the most important thing is playing the game. So, you know, the front end is kind of, it's an important thing, but it's, you know, once you're used to it, it's not that big of a deal, I'd say.
So you can access an in-game menu just by hitting the option button on the side of the controller anytime, and you can change the output, the video output, or customize the controls, which is kind of a big deal. I mean, the 4 main colored face buttons mimic the Neo Geo Mini controller, which had a different button layout. But you can arrange this so that you can use the top row, which is what I like to do, is use the entire top row as the A, B, C, and D buttons on the stick, just going across like a typical Neo Geo arcade cabinet. There's 4 quick save slots for each game, which doesn't really make a lot of sense in a fighting game. I like that stuff because it makes it easy to make comparisons.
Oh, I love that. Exactly, that's fantastic. I guess if you're struggling with the last boss in a fighting game, you can just... Oh, but you have all infinite continues, I suppose, so who cares? So yeah, it's really strange. The only reason I could see it is if you wanted to save the endings for some reason.
I guess we need to step back and look at the Mini really quick, because the Mini had a filter over everything, like a default bilinear filter that just made it look atrocious. It did look really good on the Mini's built-in screen though.
Yeah, they got the correct resolution, or around the correct resolution for the little LCD, so it did look very pixel perfect, very sharp. But yeah, like you say, when you output it to a TV, it was a blurry mess.
You know, you have several options when you go into the settings, and the system defaults to a smooth look, which is not just a bilinear filter, but it seems to have an HQ2X
oh yeah
filter, and then it's bilinear filtered over top of that.
I've talked to some emulator developers recently, or like some people working on different mini things like this projects, why do we end up with these filters as defaults? And it's like, okay, well, obviously some of the people do genuinely think it looks better, or they find the pixel art aesthetic to be unappealing, which is not really, it's not the kind of thing you want to imagine that the people working on the project would think.
And as time goes on, that sharp overall look is becoming more and more popular. So there was no option for a pixel perfect or a what do they call it? Like a pixel scaled mode in the Neo Geo Mini, but here they implemented that, and it looks pretty good. I mean, the Neo Geo runs at 320 by 224. So this seems to be, since the system outputs at 720p, this appears to be a 3x scale. Overall, it looks really good. I mean, if there is any unevenness, you're not going to be able to tell at all because these are all fighting games. You're not going to see any scrolling.
I hooked it up again to my CRT monitor, the FW900, and that's a really good way to check for things like that because those monitors don't have to deal with scaling to begin with, really. So you get the raw 720 image, and because there's no blurring during scrolling, it would really reveal the flaws, and it looked really good. Like, I would say almost perfect. And so I feel like if you play this on any flat panel screen, you're not gonna notice any of these artifacts. So in that sense, it does feel like a success in a way that maybe the Capcom stick was not, where you did get some of that sort of shimmering from the uneven pixel scaling. And that's really much less the case here.
So it has two video output modes. It has a 4:3 and a 16:9. I mean, everyone knows what we prefer, but just having the option for a 16:9 is good for people that are into that kind of thing. Under the quality menu is where you have the options for scan lines, and there is 3 different versions of scan lines included here. There's they have very weird names for them. There's transversal scan lines, which is your typical horizontal, longitudinal scan line, which is vertical, and then there's a 45-degree angle scan line, which I'm not really even sure why they included those, but I've been laughing about the scan line filter for days because it is by far the worst scanline filter I think I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yes.
And it seems to...
It's atrocious. It's so bad. I don't understand.
It is so bad. I'm not even sure if they knew what they were trying to achieve with it. It puts the HQ2X filter over everything, but it doesn't put a bilinear filter, and it just like puts scan lines, extremely thin scan lines over everything. It just, I have no idea if anybody there checked it to see if it was even remotely accurate, because it is so bad that I've been laughing about it.
It's absolutely baffling. I mean, scan lines are tough to get right. A lot of products do not get that right at all. But here, it's so bad, like you say, that you really have to wonder if the people that were working on this product either knew what scan lines are supposed to look like, or they didn't care, or like, because usually when there's a problem with a product like this, you talk to the people that worked on it, they are completely aware of the problem, right? And there's usually other factors as to why it didn't get done. But in this case, they're so weirdly bad that I genuinely don't understand what happened with it, and like why it looks this way. It doesn't make sense.
Even if they had just removed the HQ2X filter from the entire thing and just putting the scan lines over there, it would have probably made a big difference. It wouldn't be great, but I think that would make a huge difference overall. So I would just stay away from the scan line filter and just stick with the no filter and pixel scale mode. I think that you're going to get the best experience out of this using those modes.
Far and away, that's the best way, and it genuinely looks good. I mean, it looks like a sharp emulator image. But then there's stuff like the audio. I thought the sound quality was a little bit off. Did you notice this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it was specifically just the King of Fighters games, but it sounded blown out.
Yeah, like the gain was up a little bit too high.
I don't own any of the King of Fighter games to compare it against, but I mean, maybe that's just the style of the sound in those games, where everything is so loud that it almost gets kind of crunchy.
Yeah, I mean, the Neo Geo has a slightly harsh sound to it at times, but I feel like this was turned up just a little bit too far, in the sense that it did kind of crunch out the top end in a way that was a little bit unpleasant to listen to. There's definitely some work to be done there, perhaps.
And I mean, hopefully all this stuff is going to be addressed in firmware updates in the future.
Who can say? I mean, hopefully the guy that's at the scan lines is not the one writing the firmware update.
A big recurring theme with a lot of emulation is sound delay.
You know, sound delay can be weirdly difficult to pick up depending on the game. Certain games it's very obvious, especially ones where you have a very discrete sound effect that plays out right as you do an action. Then, especially if you've played it a lot, you'll notice it. But with games like this and the way that they work as fighting games, I do kind of feel like, at least I didn't really pick up on anything. It didn't feel out of place, but I certainly haven't done any testing since I had not that much time with the unit.
In terms of just general overall input lag, I didn't really notice anything, but there were times where I just couldn't pull off moves, but I don't know if that's just because I was always more of a Street Fighter player than I was any of the SNK fighters. I don't know if there's anything that's noticeable, especially because I guess input lag can make or break fighting games. I'm sure that the really hardcore fighting game fan will be able to tell right away.
But that's kind of the nature of using a system on a chipboard like this. You're drawing to a frame buffer. And the way that these things work, there is no way to get the input latency down on something like this underpowered, like a little chipset like this. I don't think it's a big problem with this stick, is the key. It doesn't feel bad to play.
The stick includes 20 built-in games, and they are all fighting games. And I think that's kind of a low point for this. I understand that the Neo Geo was known for its fighting games, and that this is basing itself on an arcade experience, but I think that it takes away from the overall package just having fighting games, because there is 4 or 5 King of Fighters games, there's 4 Samurai Showdowns, there is 3 Fatal Furies. It's crazy. It's just boring.
This is the problem with the stick. Everything else I think is an improvement over the little mini console. The build quality's good, the menu system's fine, you know, the different output options, everything about it, the HDMI output, that's all a big step up. But the game lineup is so disappointing to me, especially as somebody that's spent a lot of time this year playing Neo Geo games. It's not about fighting games. There's a lot of fighting games in the Neo Geo, but there's so much more to it. And I actually think that they've missed an opportunity to sort of remind people that the Neo Geo was not just about fighting games. But the fact that it's not there just makes it feel like this is a fighting stick for fighting games, and that's it.
People have been talking about it does have a USB input on the outside, so probably for firmware updates and unlocking additional games. Now, I tried hooking up the Mini directly to that and powering it on, and it didn't see it. If they make it that games are unlockable really easily and it doesn't really cost anything extra, then it's going to be well worth it, I think.
Yes.
But as it is, as a standalone package, the games just take away any kind of overall enthusiasm I had for it.
And I think that's something that really needs to be made clear, like, as soon as possible. Like, what do they plan to bring to the table? Like, we need some sort of guarantees on this to make this more interesting, because I think just wrapping up a bunch of these fighting games is not enough, especially when the people that really play those fighting games hardcore are probably not interested in a stick like this anyway. They're playing on regular Neo Geo hardware with their own arcade sticks. So I feel like for the more casual or slightly above casual fan, somebody that, you know, familiar with Neo Geo, wants to play some of these games, they're maybe not just into it for the fighting games, even though the fighting games are good. So it just feels like this super narrow scope. It has so much potential and they just didn't exploit it. And that's kind of why I'm ranting about that a little bit, because really that's the thing that's missing, is it's just not representing the Neo Geo experience as a whole.
A workaround to this could be that this stick can be hooked up to a Neo Geo Mini, which is all right, I guess. It can be hooked up and played directly on that, but with its horrible video output, that takes away from it as well. I'm not sure how many people would really want to do that.
The whole thing is that there's all these question marks. Like, the functionality could be amazing, but they're just not there. Like, it doesn't feel like it's fully finished or like fleshed out to go as far as it could. But the fact that there is at least the potential for those things to be added still makes it worth keeping an eye on in that sense, I think.
What's kind of interesting is that all the games default to Japanese language, and you can change it to English in the menu in each game, like built into in the ROM. And what is weird about this is that not all games have that. And that means that all those games are Japanese language only.
I mean, it's not a huge deal for these types of games, but it is a strange choice.
It doesn't really matter. But if they do add more games to this, I hope they make it so that it can be set at a interface level versus inside the game.
The core functionality is good. There's a lot of potential here. It's built well, it has nice HDMI output, the scaling is clean, the emulation seems solid, it feels good to use, the menu system is bare bones but functional. All of the core elements that need to work are here, making it much better than the Neo Geo Mini arcade cabinet. So it's technically the best thing that they've done yet in terms of the technical implementation, but it has flaws. It's basically like not finished is how it feels to me. So if they can solve these issues, I think it's it could be a wonderful way to revisit Neo Geo stuff in its own form factor like this, as opposed to, like, say on the Switch where there's already a ton of Neo Geo stuff anyway. Fix that, you have a great product, is my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that they've really shown a willingness to listen to feedback from going from the Mini to this, because it's just overall such a huge improvement, but there's still a ways to go.
Good luck. I'm over.